this when you talk about black and white extremes, all or nothing, it always makes you wonder, wow, you're saying there's absolutely no exceptions to that rule.
Hmm.
None. That always makes me wonder, like, how could you ever, literally, how could you ever say that? No scientist would ever say that. In fact, science does not prove or disprove things in a black and white fashion like that.
What's up,
Yeah.
guys? Welcome back to the Think Big Bodybuilding Media channel. You are watching Muscle Minds with Dr. Scott Stevenson. Our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. I have a bottle of J-Flex in my hand. This is my new lifestyle, basically. I'm going to be taking this product for my joints for the rest of my life. We're going to be talking about that more on some of the other programs, but
Let's commit, Scott. Like, really commit.
It's
Like,
seriously.
no fluffing around.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
once you start, I mean, I'm old and I want to keep lifting the way I want to keep lifting. So,
Right.
on that note, we're going to talk about lifting the way we both enjoy lifting today. We have a lot more conversation. We're recording this on Saturday. We're calling it High Intensity Saturday. I'm calling it that. You know, it doesn't really rhyme, but it does have a ring to it. We're going to talk more about high intensity training today. We maybe a month ago we did that episode that we called Old School High Intensity Training Techniques, and I thought it would be fun to put it out there. We got some flack, believe it or not. We got some flack from the Weeder dogma Nazis.
I wouldn't say he was a Nazi. I think he just, like, he wanted to express his opinion. I think he was rightfully did so.
No,
Everyone
yeah,
should do that, right?
I'm exaggerating because I'm trying, to beef it up, but no,
You're a shit stir is what you are.
yeah,
Scott.
that's what I was doing. No, he was a good dude. I can't remember the name of his channel, but I'll put it in the show notes though, because he does have some cool videos like of old school training and stuff. But definitely, man, I didn't realize it. All he wanted to do was talk about Mike Benser, talk about high intensity training. But it turns out that Mike Benser in high intensity training were definitely like villainized by it. There was different camps, man. You had the Weeder camp, you had Arnold, you had guys doing 2-a-days, 100,000 sets per workout just to grow your triceps. And then you had guys that were doing 2 sets, 1 set. And I don't know if 1 set is the answer, but I do know this, that, maybe there was some flaws with Menser's ideas, but it led to other really awesome ideas. I've seen guys that have done really well with like the predecessors of, like, look at DC training. I mean, if it wasn't for Mike Menser, DC training may not have existed, right?
I guess
Maybe.
I mean, I'll have. I mean, who's to say exactly? Like, we can't go back in time and determine whether there was a butterfly effect that led to Dante developing DC training. I tell you what, though, Dante is very, very clear, because this comparison was made all the time. People would just summarize DC training and say it was HIT.
Oh, okay.
Which it's not.
No.
I mean, Dante was big on, you would get some stimulus from the warm-ups because you want to make sure people were properly warmed up. So it wasn't like you went in and like held everything back to just like 1 set all out.
Yeah.
So, and he was doing Widowmakers. I don't know if those would fit into Menser.
Yeah, no.
But
I do
kind of equate those.
I do see though, how they could equate them, because I mean, it's hard to really compare it to anything else,
Yeah, I mean, if you just like trying to put it in boxes,
right.
I think you could just look along a spectrum.
Okay.
And in the one of the spectrum is Arnold was doing, and in Arnold's day, those guys Arnold was, from what I understand from the lore, and I wasn't there, but they were coming completely off all the PEDs during an off season, not even training necessarily. There's a video Arnold was doing, like a commercial for like some vacation spot. It may have been in Brazil, where he's with a couple young ladies, and he's totally scaled down. And this was like in between Olympias.
Yeah.
So he'd do kind of a Levrone type of thing.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. I saw pictures of him roofing where he was like $190 or something, not a huge deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So they'd come off, and then they go back in the gym, and then they just go full bore, which is what a lot of the guys in the Middle East do as well. Those guys will go completely clean. And then when they go on, they just load up like big time. And so their recovery goes from maybe even subpar if they're hypogonadal. They didn't do a PCT to they're fully loaded, so they can handle all that volume.
Yeah.
And they just start training with high volume. But those sets are not really taken to failure all that often, at least.
Yeah.
It's hard to always know because you don't see videos where they're following an entire training regime. You see pictures and videos of during the hard sets when they're going after it. Those are the ones that get in the motivational videos of the clips.
Right.
They're not showing all the sets,
Yeah.
Just like Instagram.
Yeah.
Like not every set for most people. I mean, for the way I do fortitude training, all the muscle rounds and all the loading sets, the last one at least.
Yeah.
And the pump sets are all brutal like that, but the warm-up sets aren't. But with the volume training, a lot of those guys were doing what they considered working sets that had quote-unquote effective reps that weren't like crazy. So that's like one end of the spectrum. Use the volume to create the stimulus. And at the other end was Mike Mentzer, and this is where we can add in the correction. What I remember from, because I've been around just for a hot minute, is that on the discussion boards, people were bantering that near the end of Mentzer's life, when he was still working with people, but he was, not maybe sort of a shadow of his former self, definitely physique-wise, because I don't think he'd trained for a while, wasn't taking great care of himself, from what I understand. And he had also tried to extend his notions of very infrequent training to where he was having people train like once a month. That's what I remember.
Okay.
So we dug around just online here just before this, try to find something. There was a mention of that in an article on bodybuilding.com where people would do that kind of thing, training that infrequently.
Okay.
But I don't think that was like a standard, like published during the prime of his popularity, HIT training standard.
Yeah.
But I heard that he was doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
With people. And so that, the thing that I recall too, and I'm not trying to speak poorly of Mentzer, but he was.
Don't, Scott, you watch it.
I know.
Watch it.
That those last, well, say it this way, his last couple of years were not representative of him during his prime when he was really, promulgating his philosophies.
Yeah.
And that he was trying to make some money training people and had to kind of stand out in some way. And the training with even less frequency. It might work for some people. This is the main criticism that was levied against HIT training, is that you take people who are doing too much, as we talked about the last podcast.
Yeah.
And they're blasting. Maybe they're overreaching. Maybe they're functionally overreaching is what it would be described as, meaning they're no longer making progress. They haven't started overtrain where they're losing performance or losing muscle mass. But if they slow things down and deload or stop training, it's quote unquote functional, because the rebound, the adaptation that happens after ceasing to do that excessive training regime is one that leads to gains. Yeah. So that is what people were saying. Well, yeah, you come off of trying to do 20 sets and doing way too much, and your sleep's messed up, and you're literally barely hanging in there, and you rest. Yeah. And you start eating. Well, yeah, you're gonna rebound like a motherfucker. That's not because, training once every 10 days. This is a criticism that would be levied. Right. Is the best way to go about, but you make good gains because the adaptation is set up based on what was done previously.
Right. Right.
Which is always the case. Like the adaptation comes after the stimulus was applied. Mm. So the real stimulus for that growth wasn't the once every 10 or 12 days or Mentzer's training per se. The stimulation, the adaptation was set up by the training that happened before that. Yeah. And then you sort of edged it along with a prolonged taper. Mm. So that's what people would say. But I think it's somewhere in between.
I think you're right. I don't think I don't necessarily think it's going to ever be black and white. That, and that's the thing too. I think that the minute you say, hey, we're going to talk about HIIT training, high intensity training, all of a sudden I feel like people who are anti-HIIT can come out of the woodwork, because we did have the one guy, but there's been other people who have just said like, oh, that's garbage. But it's like, but wait a minute, is it really? Just like I wouldn't say that the Weider principles are garbage. You know what I mean? Like, there's some really good stuff in there, and I think that there is some really good things to be learned from volume. But I think that along the way, there's got to be some sort of middle ground. And I think that it's important to be able to understand both extremes, really.
Well, here's the thing. Like, we know Brandon Curry with the interview we had with him. They just train like crazy. They've got everything set up recovery wise. They're basically eating, sleeping, getting massages, there's no messing
Everything
around. There's no excessive energy. And the training is just outrageous what they do. And he even said, and this is a really important thing that I try to keep in my memory, is that when new guys would come in to train there, and some of them would make it and some of them wouldn't, it was the ones literally they set up that training regime so that only the strong would survive.
Yeah.
Only those who could adapt to that training stimulus and wouldn't end up backsliding were the ones who stuck around.
Yeah.
And if you could adapt to that training stimulus, and this relates back to our last podcast, that meant you had the recovery abilities to do that.
Yeah.
If you can apply that much stimulus and recover, then you've got a much stronger stimulus, creating a much greater adaptation.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But if it's too much stimulus for you and you can't recover from it, then that's not a good adaptation.
Right.
So, but then we got Dorian Yates. He was a pretty good bodybuilder.
He's all right. Yeah, he did all right for himself.
Not bad. He managed to. And the better and bigger he got, the less he had to train, because he learned how to train even harder and harder. And each of the weights were higher.
Yeah.
The stimulus, the inroads and recovery, to use kind of a Mansourian term, were greater. So you can imagine if like Dorian had started doing what Brandon's doing, training wise.
It probably wouldn't have been good for him.
No, I don't. I'm almost certain it wouldn't have. He was very meticulous in what he figured out and how he trained.
Yeah.
And we go back just like, I don't know, 3 or 4 podcasts where we talked about the study where they had each workout was for just the knee extensors, the quads, 3 sets of knee extensions, and they compared 5 versus 2 and 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. So it was a variation in volume and frequency, but the volume was a varying frequency. But here we're just talking about volume now. The sets were carried out in the same way in terms of failure goes in each of those workouts. And on average, no difference in growth. Yeah. It didn't make a difference on average. But when they dissected and looked at the individuals, and they trained one leg one way and one leg the other way, they just compacted the 2 or 3 times a week. So the 6 and 9 sets versus 15 sets. And some people grew better with the 15 sets. Some people grew better with the 6 or 9 sets. Mm-hmm. For some people it was the opposite. Some people grew really well no matter what they did.
Yeah.
And other people didn't grow very well either way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's going to be people for whom an HIT approach rocks. It's perfect. They have the mentality for that. They'll adapt to that because it suits their recovery abilities. It's what all those little things we were talking about last time with the genetic polymorphisms that are involved with recovery and muscle recovery in particular. And they like to train that way, so they keep doing that. Other people like to get the pump. They do better from the volume. They can handle that. They've got recovery resources that will allow that, so they do better there.
Yeah.
So, obviously, you got Arnold, pretty good. You got Brandon, pretty good. You got Dorian, pretty good. That's a pretty wide stretch.
Yeah, it would be.
You got fucking Ronnie, who trained like high volume and everything twice a week.
Yeah.
Like his recovery resources were just incredible, and he's still lifting those ginormous loads.
Right.
800-pound deadlifts and all that kind of crazy shit. So, he's doing sets of 12 like with 5 plates on a bent over row.
Yeah.
200-pound dumbbell presses.
Right.
For sets of 12.
So
he's training that frequently, like that hard, like so. That's just there are guys who could do those lifts, but they couldn't recover from that the way Ronnie could.
Sure.
Yeah. So yes, you're gonna say something.
Yeah. Well, I had some questions. So I'm still doing research, still like dicking around and reading, and listening to stuff about HIIT and getting perspectives. And I recently watched a video that was basically like titled like Mike Mentzer HIIT style training. So I checked it out, and it turned out to be pretty anti-HIIT is what it was. I was like, oh, I'm going to watch something, and this will be interesting. And the guys just pretty much bashed Mike Mentzer and Arthur Jones, and they called Arthur Jones. They said he looked like Lee Harvey Oswald. He smoked cigarettes. He was paranoid, and he carried a gun. And that was like basically his contributions to the world. I don't know. Anyway, though,
Okay.
but one thing that was said, and I wanted to run this by you. I thought this would be almost a question of sorts. It was said that it is impossible to trade intensity for volume. That you can't going max effort. It's been proven that going max effort will not compensate for more sets. So you could do more sets with sub-max effort and get just as good of effect, if not better, than going all out for less sets. That's impossible.
Black and white extremes, all or nothing. It always makes you wonder, wow, you're saying there's absolutely no exceptions to that rule. None. That always makes me wonder, like, how could you ever say that? No scientist would ever say that. In fact, science does not prove or disprove things in a black and white fashion like that. Because what you get, science uses what's called inferential statistics. We'll just talk about the sort of philosophy of science a little bit.
Okay.
Because I have a doctorate in philosophy. The PhD is a doctorate in philosophy. But the idea there is that you use the statistics to infer from a sample what you would expect to find in that population in general on average. So, for example, when they did the study that with the 5 times a week versus 3 and 2 times a week, they found when they ran the statistics, on average, no difference in gains and muscle size with those different training regimes. Right?
Okay.
So if you looked at that study, you'd say, well, there's no difference.
It's the same.
And if you weren't being, they were the same. They statistically there was no difference, and mathematically there's always going to be a difference. Like 100 versus 100.1 is a difference.
Yeah.
But statistically speaking, if your sample averages were that, unless you sample like 1 billion people, you're not going to find a difference there. So, but we know, when they looked at the individual data, that it certainly was possible for there to be a difference. That's why that is so valuable.
Okay.
So when anyone claims that something is impossible, that is just like, it's like physics is the most hard science there is, and physics itself boils down to probability to some degree. If you look at it from a quantum mechanics standpoint. And physicists, I don't think a physicist would ever say anything is impossible, at least a good one.
Okay.
And certainly other scientists would not. So that's just kind of ludicrous. It's a nonsensical statement to say something's absolutely impossible.
Okay. Because I didn't know how to respond to that.
We can look at that stuff.
I'm not a science guy, right? I didn't know how to respond to that, but I did. Right. I did feel like something about this doesn't sound right, so I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. So then we look at Dorian Yates and what we just said. Now, Dorian there was no oxygen gym. Maybe there was, but there was an oxygen gym as it is now available. And Dorian wouldn't have left the UK, I don't think, anyway, to train.
No.
But he certainly has managed to build a pretty impressive physique. Many people might say that his physique would have beaten Brandon's last year at the Olympia stage at his best.
It'd be cool to see them up against each other, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, absolutely, for sure. But so Dorian managed to train to failure with a greatly reduced volume compared to what Brandon does. And it seems like he made up for it, but that would be impossible, right? And if you say, that statement also is totally ignoring the volume. So are we talking about 1 set to failure, or 3 sets to failure, or 5 sets to failure? So you take any individual, and let's say you make their frequency twice a week.
Yeah.
For every muscle group, basically. Just kind of keep it simple. There's going to be a dose response: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets to failure. Eventually, over the course of the week, you're going to get to some point where your adaptation is optimal, and then if you keep on adding sets, you're going to start overreaching, and eventually you start overtraining, and you start losing performance. So if you just lump all of those scenarios together as failure training, as that statement generically does, it misses the point that there's going to be some peak adaptation on training to failure. What that statement is suggesting is that if you then look at someone who's training with volume and not going to failure, leaving who knows how many reps in the tank, and you compared 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, X number, maybe you could go to 20 sets and still recover. That doing 20, and that for that dose response, it goes up and up and up and up and up, and it peaks at 20 per week. So two sets of 10, which falls in line with a lot of the research looking at volume training, but which is mainly based on untrained individuals. So that doesn't really apply to most of the people who are listening and trying to glean useful information from us.
Which makes sense then, Yeah.
So let's take those two optimals.
And you know what, too? I don't want to hang you up too much here, but if I think about it, like I'm doing personal training here out in my gym, and one of the guys I'm working with is pretty much brand new to training. His ability to go to failure is a lot different than my ability to go to failure. And I can see for him, if he's going from not training at all to doing 3 sets on the leg press over here, that's going to be a lot more of a stimulus than, it's going to be a different story, I guess. Yeah. Completely.
Been saying that 100%. That's why you get a great training effect from untrained individuals. They just have to do something. It's so much more than what they've been doing.
Yeah.
The increment in stimulus from 0 to 3 sets.
Yeah.
Per workout is gigantic.
Yeah.
But let's just keep all those things the same, and let's say what that would basically be saying for a given individual. For let's just take one individual that if you could come up with a dose response from 1 to whatever 10 sets of failure training, and the 6 sets of failure training per week was the best adaptation.
Yeah.
And then the same individual, let's say they've got a twin, or you've got 2 sets of twins, and identical twins, and you run them through, everything else being the same. You got them at the bodybuilding ranch, so their diet and recovery, everything's exactly identical as best you can do it. And maybe for them, it's 20 sets a week.
Okay.
Or let me say it's 16, something like that. So 2 times 8. So that would be kind of up at the upper end of the range that you see with the research generally, something like that. But there's also, Brad studies, which was suggesting that 45 sets a week could be better in some cases. Yeah, which is just crazy. So anyway, let's take for that individual, 6 sets to failure is the best you can get from failure training, and 16 sets to failure is the best you can get from non-failure training. So what kind of non-failure training are we doing? Are we going to 0 reps in reserve and not training to where you actually have a failure point? Or are we leaving 5 reps in the tank? If you're leaving 5 reps in the tank, you'd get some gains probably for the first, 6 months, something like that.
Sure, because you've done nothing.
Yeah, you've done nothing, so that's definitely something. Yeah. And then eventually, like, what happens? Like, you're still training not very hard. You still got 5 reps in the tank. You're going to gain some strength. It's going to be pretty paltry.
Yeah.
So you're gonna so the statement again, because it's non-qualified, doesn't say how many reps are in the reps in reserve. It just says more volume. So let's just take it to the extreme. What if you just left, those were sets of 12, and you just started doing sets of 6?
Okay.
And just added them up.
Yeah.
Do you think you could ever get growth from doing sets of 6 with 12 rep max loads? That would like, if you just did that, like, when would that peter out? Pretty rapidly.
Yeah. You might get something at first.
So so it's just saying that volume will always be better than training to failure is nonsensical, because it doesn't qualify the reps in reserve.
Okay.
In the effort level.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a whole spectrum there. So that doesn't make, when you say impossible, you can see how ludicrous this is, because you said something's impossible. Like, what if you just did triples? With 12 rep max, it's like all those reps would be really, really easy. Yeah. You did 60 sets of them or something ludicrous like that.
Right.
So it makes no sense. Plus, we know from the study the Damas study that we've talked about now, I'd mentioned earlier, we did the whole podcast on, essentially, is that some people do better from higher volume than lower volume, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Those were to failure. So you put those people on like that let's go to failure training, and some people they're the best with 6 sets. Well, some people are going to be better with 15 sets.
Yeah.
Some people are going to grow more than others with more sets versus less sets.
Yeah.
That's true, and that's a failure training study. They took those sets to failure. I would presume, although I can't think of anything offhand, that if you train with reps in reserve, you're going to see, you probably would see the same sort of phenomenon.
Okay.
I don't have any reason to wonder why.
Yeah.
In fact, that study that we talked about with regards to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, where they took just the responders, on average, that regime was a very high volume one that I believe used reps in reserve. And on average, no one grew. On average, the average was no growth, essentially. It did not produce muscle growth. But half of the subjects roughly did grow from that, and half of them didn't. Remember we had the one guy who like lost a massive amount of size? We looked like he lost like over 2,000 square microns in fiber cross-sectional area over the thing.
Yeah.
He got fucking buried.
Yeah.
And then somebody else like gained like 1,200 or something like that. I can't remember the numbers exactly, but there was a gigantic diversity.
Yeah.
So that was a high volume training. So I think, that guy there's plenty of volume there, right? What if he were to drop back and just do 4 sets to failure? I bet we could get some growth out of him some way, shape, or form. Maybe he was a non-responder and he just obliterated himself.
Yeah.
So the bottom line there is that there's going to be a dose response for failure training. There's going to be a dose response at any level of effort for different individuals. So you might be able to do 16 sets, leaving 3 reps in the tank, and get the same growth as 6 sets. Leaving no reps in the tank, going to actual failure, which people don't often do. Like, how many times have you seen someone do that on a back squat? No,
it's hard.
Really to failure.
Yeah, that's hard. That means that you have to basically go down in the hole, and rarely ever you're gonna need the safeties.
You don't come out of the hole, or you try to come up and you fail, and your spotter has to bring you back up.
They do make those safety bars for a reason, but you rarely see people using them. Do you?
I always use them. Yeah, I don't because when I do muscle rounds, I typically do muscle rounds when I'm squatting on a Smith machine.
Okay,
so I can just go down to stops.
Yeah,
because you don't want to do it with a barbell because you have to walk back and forth.
Yeah,
that uses up energy unnecessarily. It's kind of unsafe when you're pushing it. But I'll take those to failure. There's a video I think somewhere of me on Instagram.
Okay,
doing that. So I do those to failure. They're fucking brutal.
Yeah.
But people don't typically even do that in the gym most of the time. But anyway, there's going to be a dose response for 3 reps in the tank, and it's going to differ from one with no reps in the tank, and it's going to differ for training to actual failure.
Okay.
But if we just say all volumes the same, regardless of the reps in reserve, like we said, you do six rep sets with 12 rep max loads, eventually that's going to be a non-stimulus, no matter how many of them you do.
Yeah.
It's not going to fucking matter because it's just too easy. And there's a study. This is I cite this study in the Fortitude Training book.
While you're looking for that, I'll tell everybody that, guys, we have a few questions coming in. We will tackle your questions toward the end of the show, so hang in there. Otherwise, if you want to come back, we'll have this out on YouTube shortly, a little while.
So in this study, they had a control group, and then they had 2 regimes. They were doing what they called a no-rest regimen, where they did 3 to 5 sets, 10 repetitions to 10 rep max for lat pull down, shoulder press, and knee extension. So that's just kind of how they mix it up. And this was published in 2005. Goto, like Goto, Goto, but I think it's Goto in my bastardized Japanese.
Okay.
They're from Ibaraki, Japan, is where the Institute of Health Sciences. So that was just basically 10 reps, the 10 rep max, and then in the regimen with rest within a set, they would rest. I believe it was 30 seconds at the midpoint of each set of exercises, and they were looking at reducing metabolic stress. So the volume was the same, they were going to failure in the normal regime, and the other one they took a 30-second rest. So you do a set of 5, and then rest 30 seconds, and do a set of 5. So you're never hitting failure. Same load, same volume, but just not hitting failure. So let's see, and I'll pull up. I can actually even send you this picture. We can throw it up here.
All right.
I'll just read from the abstract for right now. 12 weeks of resistance training, the no rest regimen, greater increases 1 rep max, isometric strength, muscle endurance, and with knee extension than the with rest regimen. The no rest group showed a marked increase in muscle cross-sectional area, whereas the within set rest group and control groups did not. There was no growth. So their volume was the same, but they got no growth.
Okay.
Maybe they could have doubled that and maybe got some growth. But in that case, the volume was exactly the same, but they took failure was better because those were so easy. Taking 30 seconds in between, someone could go in the gym and try this, like pick up your 10 rep max and do a set of 5, where it's maybe you're just starting to feel it a little bit. You're only halfway through the set, and then just put it down, rest for 30 seconds, and then do another set of 5.
Yeah.
That's going to be easy. You're never going to really probably tap into at least some well, you probably will with that load, but you're never going to fully tax and fully activate the high threshold motor units.
Okay.
They might be activated, but they're not going to be activated at a frequency that produces maximal force.
Yeah.
So because it's never that effortful, you're never getting even close to failure with those.
Right.
So that's the kind of the most direct study I know. There's some other ones that are sort of similar, but they didn't get any growth. The volume was the same. So it doesn't exactly show more volume. There's some other studies. We just came up with this topic this morning on the fly. So there are some other studies that have kind of we could pull the same information from, but I just haven't had a chance to look them up.
Okay.
So.
Hey, what's up, guys? Scott here. I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll get right back to the programming. If you're listening to this on iTunes, do us a favor, leave us a good 5-star review. That'll help other people to find our shows. Thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to shout out the joint supplements that they have available over at truenutrition.com today. And listen, if you guys didn't know, I mean, most of you probably do, I had a partial tear in my shoulder recently, and it was quite a scare because I thought I wasn't going to be able to continue lifting the way that I enjoy lifting. I don't want that to end. And thankfully, I'm not going to need surgery, but I am going to need to take care of my joints. And this was a wake-up call for me. So I talked to Dante Trudell. It turns out there's only 2 supplements that will actually rebuild connective tissue. So the first one is Hydrolyzed Beef Collagen, and they offer this through True Nutrition. It's not cheap. We're talking like $25.99 a pound. But listen, each scoop, you get 29 grams of high-quality, high-digesting protein, plus you're rebuilding your connective tissue. So you're using this as a supplement, and you're using this as food, so you can replace some of the protein powder you would have been drinking to offset the cost. I got the unflavored version, and basically there's no taste to this stuff. There's maybe a tiny, tiny aftertaste, but there's basically no taste. And what you can do is you could just mix in some Crystal Light or mix it with, an intra workout that you're using. You could use it at any point of the day. I've been mostly using it either as an intra workout or I've been mixing it with my pre-workout. I had a little bit of Crystal Light and I am good to go. The second supplement that I'm using is a product called J-Flex from True Nutrition. And the most important part of this is a supplement called UC2. That's undenatured type 2 cartilage. So with the beef collagen, you get type 1 and type 3. This provides type 2. So these things combined will give you the best chance of restoring connective tissue and keeping your connective tissue strong. Along with that, it also contains glucosamine, chondroitin, MSM, SAMe, things that you would expect to find in a regular joint product. And you get boswellia extract and curcumin, both of which are great for inflammation. So if you want to take care of your joints, check this stuff out. And you can use our code ADVICES. That'll get you a little bit of additional savings. And of course, that goes directly to help support our programming. I want to keep lifting the way I want to lift as long as possible.
Can I ask you, so people cite the Brad Schoenfeld, was it meta-analysis about training to failure, saying that proved that you don't need to train to failure. Can you address that? Because it's been proven.
Yeah.
There's been a study And I feel like if you're me, I don't know what to say to that. Okay. I'm not a big study guy, as you know. I'm interested in learning, but then, I hear stuff and I kind of take it with a grain of salt. And I say, though, that that just doesn't seem right to me, but I can't refute it. I'm being told there's proof.
Yeah, well, there's proving, and you never can, you can provide evidence for something, but proving something this is actually, I talk about this in my book.
Yeah,
is not something you can do you could do that in physics. You could, for instance, prove the existence of some particular particle, because once you find it once, that means it exists or existed when you have the proof there for it.
Okay.
But look at those two studies. You would say, if you looked at the first study that said there's no difference in those two regimes, 5 versus 2 versus 3 sets per week, and said, well, that proved it. There's no difference. A proof suggests it's 100% for everybody all the time. And
okay.
It's not the case, because they very, very cleverly and insightfully knew this. They're looking at their data, just in tabulating it all and running the statistics. You see the spreads. You see the differences. They probably just having their data in a spreadsheet with left and right legs for all their subjects, not knowing, which particular condition they were in. They just had left and right. They're like, keep on seeing these differences. It's like, okay, well, if there really were no systematic difference, and there wasn't sort of a systematic difference, there was an individual difference, then most of the numbers would be pretty damn close. Everyone would be getting the same kind of growth from 2 versus 5 or 3 versus 5 times a week. But they weren't seeing that. They're seeing, like, some of those, we pointed them out maybe we can link this in the show notes. We pointed those out in that podcast, that there's this ginormous difference for some people.
Yeah.
2 or 3-fold greater growth in one condition versus the other, and it wasn't systematic. It wasn't like always that 5 times is better than 3 and 2. Sometimes it was the opposite.
Okay.
So you're not proving anything. So that's the lay media says that, and studies prove, science proves. I have this really annoying ad that pops up. It's I get the ad for this particular soap, and this other guy who's just kind of a knucklehead selling, I don't know what he sells, foods increase your testosterone levels and some other things. And he says, studies prove.
Yeah. You hear that all the time.
I know you do, but it's not something you will hear a well-educated, well-trained scientist say. It just won't.
So if you hear somebody say that, there should be some alarms going off.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a red flag. It's like, because you're doing proofs in mathematics. You can prove something maybe in a court of law through the evidence. You'd use that terminology, and maybe in science you may say we prove the existence of this particle or something like that, and in physics. But you're not going to do that in exercise science when you're using inferential statistics.
Okay.
Trying to find this meta-analysis here.
All right.
So basically that's in untrained individuals. So that doesn't necessarily apply. That's an external validity type of thing. We know that things that work for untrained people won't work for trained people anymore. You can't train the way you were when you were untrained, and it's still, if you still keep 5 reps in the tank.
Okay.
Which, and this is Eric Helms' work has shown this, is people think they're training to failure, or they'll try to estimate how many reps they have left. Yeah. And then, so you say, what do tell us when you think you got, 2 or 3 reps left, and they'll stop. They'll nod and they'll say, okay, we'll keep, and they'll push them to failure, and they'll get 10 or 12 reps.
So in this conclusion,
gigantic discrepancy.
It's saying, furthermore, it seems unnecessary to perform failure training to maximize muscular strength. However, if incorporated into a programming, training to failure should be performed sparingly to limit risks of injury and overtraining.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pointing to non-failure being better, but that just throws everything all together.
Okay.
Training was controlled, volume was controlled in some, but not others.
Okay.
So we have that interaction, like we talked, like the hypothetical, 6 sets to true failure.
Yeah.
Versus, how many sets leaving 2 or 3 reps in the tank. Going to 0 reps in reserve, where your next rep's going to be a failure rep, you're certain of that. This is how Jordan trains.
Yeah.
For the most part. you don't see them actually doing failure points, unless ideally, because that's where you can get injury. Truly, that's could be the toughest part if you don't have things set up, especially if you're like, not in a squat rack with the safeties there, for instance. But there's going to be a different growth. There's a different stimulus to failure, to 0 reps in reserve, 2 reps in reserve, 5 reps in reserve. Eventually, you're going to get no effective stimulus.
Okay.
And I've talked about this before here in some other podcasts, is that as you get more trained, you're going to be able to learn how to train harder. And if you're still pushing things. So your failure point, as you said, is different than the failure point of the client you mentioned before.
Yeah.
If, you looked at him like, 2 or 3 years from now.
It'll be different for sure.
It'd be very different. He'd be able to take those sets much further.
Hey, he's able to take those sets, but he's able to take them further now than he was a month ago. He's brand new.
It's always going to be changing. Yeah. And over the years, you'll get even better and better at that.
Yeah.
And the loads will go up.
Yes.
Too. So it's not as if you're still using 100 pounds 5 years into it. Now you're maybe at 300 pounds. And you got there in part because you've continued to train harder and harder and harder. So at some point down the road, and this is kind of a key thing that I think what we mentioned, Brad, we were talking about this beforehand, Brad Schoenfeld on the Brains and Gains podcast.
Okay.
Was asked the question, something along the lines of, what is a finding in the research literature that doesn't really jive with your sense of how things play out in the real world?
Yeah.
And the thing that came to mind for Brad is that he thinks that there's more utility and value in training to failure, especially for advanced trainees, than what the research has demonstrated.
Okay.
And so to that point, and I agree with him, and he talked about people like John Meadows and other advanced trainees. It's not that you need to take every set to failure. There's multiple ways to do this. You can combine non-failure with failure training.
Yeah.
You can do warm-up sets that are somewhat effective as you're moving your way up, or you cannot do that. But eventually, you're going to have to push harder and harder and harder, which is what happens. It goes along with progressive overload as you get stronger, to where, let's say, you get to heavy, heavy loads, and what creates an effective overload stimulus, what creates a stimulus for adaptation, is going to be only those sets and only those efforts in combination with the right amount of volume that are basically to failure or very close to it.
Okay.
Because here's the way to look at it. Right now, for your trainee, he's starting out, and let's say if you could hypnotize him and tell him, like, your life's on the line, your family's going to be killed, your world will be over unless you get 20 reps here, and that 20 reps would be his true max.
Yeah.
But right now he only gets 12.
Yeah.
So he's got a lot more room in there, but he's still growing from that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those 12s are still great. He's still growing like a weed because he's just starting off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you get more and more advanced, the stimulus has to be up because you're getting to the law of diminishing returns is starting to take effect. So those sets that would be true 20 rep sets can't be just taken to 12 reps and expect to have a stimulus. You got to take them to 15. You may not have to train to where you're bleeding out of every orifice.
Yeah.
When you get to be intermediate, 3 years in, but when you want to get every little inch, every little ounce of extra muscle, then you're going to have to take those closer and closer to a true failure point and have to train like you're insane.
Yeah.
In order to create anything that remotely that resembles or is a stimulus in those sets. So your effective reps in this case, when he starts off, he's got 8 reps in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
If you could actually measure that and get that, this is the hard thing, is you can't really measure those things in a lab very well. Because you have to create, like, those circumstances are not something that you can really generate very well in a lab. But it does vary a lot depending on labs. Some labs, if you're just standing there with your clipboard and you say, keep going, you got a few more left. Okay, good, thanks. Just write it down. Like, there's no motivation there.
Yeah.
You get some labs and you're screaming at people.
Really?
Going bonkers. Oh yeah, like that's how it should be done.
Is that what you
just
did?
Like you're in the gym and yeah, absolutely, yes. Depending on the person, like it had to be standard. Like if we had big studies and I couldn't be there all the measurements, then I wouldn't do that. We'd have to kind of standardize that, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Imagine, when do guys, like, here's just like this may have been studied to some degree, but like guys see a hot chick coming by in the gym and they're kind of there for picking up. That's one of their, at least, second or third, if not their primary motivation for being in the gym. They're going to train. They're trying to show off, right?
Yeah. They don't know the women don't really care about that, but yeah.
No, but for some reason we're disillusioned to think that, our alpha male brains, we're still stuck in the jungle thinking, the harder we beat our chest, the more likely we are to procreate. So you do that. It motivates you. So different things will motivate you in different ways, just like this, because it happens in the real world. You get with the right training partner. Like I've said this before, I want to find a training partner who will make me his bitch. Yeah. Who just goes so friggin' hard or so friggin' strong that I'm motivated just to try to keep up in a way I wouldn't otherwise be. Yeah, yeah. But some people are demotivating almost. You're like, God, I wish this person were even here.
Yeah, yeah. I'll never be as strong as Dave Henry. I could see someone might feel that way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Dave and I were great for one another because we were very, very close in strength.
Okay, yeah.
Like I would beat him on legs a little bit, and he would always beat me on chest, and that was a weak muscle group for me, which made sense. Yeah. So I always was trying to catch him there. Back, we're pretty close. We're always neck and neck. So I beat Dave. It was like a big thing on something that I normally beat him on. So that was really good because it was actually true. We were at this kind of the same competitive level strength-wise. Physique-wise, obviously not. Nowhere even near. Yeah. But strength-wise, we're very, very close.
Yeah. I could see, though, that if you were with someone that, say, looked better than you, then you could, for somebody it may be motivating. For somebody else it may be demotivating. I could get that. Yeah. Just like to scream at someone and tell them, like, get more rep. They might get motivated by that. Someone else might get scared. Be like, I don't like that, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ben Chow's been talking about that a bit on the Fuad's podcast. Yeah. Where, like, he even did a photo shoot. I think he was at Redcon, did a photo shoot. And I think the photographer, someone there, was trying to get him pumped up for a big squat. Mm-hmm. And that's not how he gets fired up for those. It's too far along his arousal U-curve. So there's an optimal arousal. You go too far and, like, your performance goes down. He has to have his mind straight and have a certain level of calm so that he can execute the squat the way he wants to. Okay. So that doesn't work for him. Screaming and yelling just throws him off his game.
That's the way Shelby was. Shelby didn't want you to talk during his set. He didn't want you to put your hands by the bar or anything. Nothing. You just stay there. I don't want
that either.
Yeah. He doesn't want any sound or anything. He wanted to be able to focus on what he was doing. So everybody's different.
Yeah. So, but to go back to the lab now, where you're having people do failure training, even if they're untrained people, and you're not going to be able to get those people to go and do what they probably could do. Okay. Because we know this. We know this simply because there's there's a learning curve that happens just with practice. Yeah. Where the neurological gains and the strength gains far outpace the muscle mass gains. So that's not a structural thing in the nervous system. That's a learning effect, and some of that's probably just purely sort of psychological as opposed to just skill acquisition. Okay. Just getting used to being comfortable doing things and putting it all together, even from a cognitive standpoint. Plus, as Eric found in the research that he did, if you actually push, he said go to failure, and if you don't give them any encouragement, their failure might be 12 reps, but if you actually push them, their failure could be 20 reps. If was a huge gap for some people. Not everyone, it varied. Yeah. And that varies as a function of training experience, too. Yeah. The more trained you are, the harder you can push. The better you are at, and this has been demonstrated, the better you are at actually assessing the loads that you're going to use for a given number of reps when training to failure. And when I do muscle rounds, I can literally I can't remember the last time it didn't work for me. I'm in a new gym doing a new exercise, and maybe I've never even used the machine, which I try to seek out actually stuff I haven't used before, and I just load the weight up, and I know right where I'm going to be to get a muscle round where I'll fail at the appropriate time and almost never go too high or go too low. Okay. It almost never happens. I just feel like, how do I figure it out? And eventually you'll just know. You can tell because you know how much the load, how heavy it feels on the warm up sets. Yeah. So you can't get as much of an accurate, I don't think, failure point or reps to failure with untrained people. In fact, the testing itself will create a different failure point. Some of these studies they've done where they just repeatedly test. They try to get stability. It's very hard to get in some cases.
Yeah.
Because you go in like, let's get a 1 rep max, just with a 1 rep max.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's 100 pounds. Like, okay, we'll come back 2 days later and they get 105 pounds. Like, okay, well, they come back a third time and they get 115 pounds. It's like, well, you're getting a practice effect that keeps on changing, like without any training, just from repeatedly testing. So you're not gonna be training with nearly the intensity when you're untrained like that, with nearly the effort relative to what you're actually capable of. Whereas when you get highly trained, you're much more able to do that.
Okay.
So reps in reserve differs depending on training status dramatically, depending on the person.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I've heard John talk about that a lot too, and talk about, like, well, how many reps in reserve did you really have? I think my definition, how close am I to failure is probably a lot different than, once again, my client who's, been training for a month now.
And as an aside, I'll throw this out too. One of the things that I do for a reason I've talked about, but in fortitude training, I have people do the reps continuously.
Okay.
So you don't pause between reps unless you need to reorient your stance or something like that to situate yourself properly so you can do things safely or the right way.
Yeah.
But you do them continuously because what happens, and I saw this is how people get better at widowmakers, and it makes them more and more treacherous. Is as you get more and more trained and used to struggling through those just crazy balls to the wall sets, you learn how to get more reps simply by pausing more.
Yeah.
And rest between reps. Of course, yeah. That's how you see some of these people doing widowmakers, like Chris Pisarcik. Remember him? He's passed away now.
No, I didn't know.
He was mental flex on the boards for a while.
Okay.
Ben Bruno, who's now kind of a famous trainer out in Hollywood.
Okay.
He used to do the intense set of the month.
Oh.
And he would do these crazy sets that just lasted forever. And because he would just get some reps to go almost to failure, and then he'd just wait.
Yeah.
He'd wait till he recovered, had great recovery, and the sets would just go on forever.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Keep doing this, right? And you've done this too. I've seen this when you were first doing, I think, muscle rounds. You were pausing between things.
Yeah.
So that's hard training. Well, that doesn't. If you allow that to happen, then what you do is you go. It's no longer even a regular set. So taking a set to failure, when you first start doing that versus a year later, can be a different phenomenon. It's a totally different stress.
Yeah.
If you're letting yourself pause between those reps.
Okay, absolutely.
So then the volume that you can handle goes down if you're just counting sets as the way you count volume.
Okay.
So if you take a set to failure and you do, let's say do 10 straight sets, 10 straight reps, and you continuously until you hit 0 reps in reserve or you actually fail, versus taking that weight like people would do with the Widowmaker, and maybe you get 7, and you pause, and then you get 2 or 3 more, 2 more, let's say, and you pause, and then you get 2 more, and you pause, and then you get a single, and then you pause, and you get another single, and you pause. Now you've just come close to failure 4 times.
Yeah.
You've gotten 13 more reps. So it's still one set, right?
Yeah, right.
But what it does to your recovery abilities and how that would then influence, imagine then, we're talking about this dose response. Imagine what happened if you did your sets continuously like that, and you looked at what one set gives you, 2 sets, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Eventually you'd have some optimal adaptation doing continuous reps.
Yeah.
Versus doing all your sets like Widowmakers like that.
Yeah.
Totally different dose response.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing that I always talked about is that's just so taxing on your nervous system. That will just destroy you, nervous system wise. Whereas I think you can get away with more volume in terms of the muscle training the muscle, if you keep those reps continuous and then just go to failure or 0 reps in reserve.
Yeah, me recovering from a muscle round is cake compared to recovering from a Widowmaker.
Yes. Absolutely.
Or even a rest pause. Yeah. It's a different thing. It's a different thing. I like the Widowmaker the best personally. That's where you're really putting all your guts out there, and You know,
right.
You're not limited by, I feel like with a muscle round, it's like I'm limited by my stupid muscle that quit on me. You know what I mean?
That's what you want.
I know.
That's kind of what you, yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I didn't get to like put my heart and guts into it. My stupid freaking muscle stopped working. And I know that's what you want, because you want to save that central nervous system. You basically be able to come back and do it again faster, because I do recover from them so much better, so much more easily with that kind of training.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great
you
trick.
can imagine then, imagine you have someone who can do and you adjust the weight so they get sets of 10 continuous reps until each set the last exactly 10 reps. So they can maybe do 5 of those.
Yeah.
Whereas if in terms of what they can recover from, they could only do maybe 3 sets where they allow themselves breaks and do it sort of Widowmaker style.
Yeah.
So those 3 sets with the same loads might be, 13 or 14 reps. So let's say they get 40 reps on those 3 sets. Whereas if they did 5 sets with continuous reps, they would have 50 reps. So it's 50 versus 40. And that means greater stimulus in a certain way, at least.
Right.
It's hard to compare because you've got more reps that are close to failure and the activation pattern is different. But that's the idea behind fortitude training, is to take advantage of there is a dose response and do as many of those continuous rep sets, because the relative inroads per unit volume of training on the muscle is less when you don't come so close to failure repeatedly in doing things Widowmaker style.
Yeah, which makes sense.
So, yeah. But anyway, back to I think we started on this with it's impossible to
replace volume with intensity.
Volume with intensity, and I'm like, now you understand that's why it's such an asinine statement to say something's impossible. It can never happen. It's the exact same thing in black and white thinking is saying we proved this. It can never be any exceptions to this rule.
Yeah.
Which science shows that when you do inferential statistics, you may find no differences in the means, statistically speaking, but when you look at the individuals, that's where the genius is of finding information. In my mind, a lot of times in the science is so are there individuals who respond to this particular strategy? Yeah. And are there some that don't? Well, good. We'll look at the ones, or even look at studies. Are there studies that show that people respond from intra-workout nutrition? Yes. Are there some that show it they don't? Yes. So some people will and some people won't. Can we figure out from how those studies were set up what differed that might explain that? If not, it could just be that there's different individual differences, and for whatever reason, that some we can't quite glean from the study descriptions itself. Yeah. They had more people who tended to respond, so they found a significant difference.
Okay, yeah.
You'll find this all the time. You look across studies and the rate of muscle growth and everything. It's all over the place. Some studies show good muscle growth. Some studies show shitty muscle growth. Some of that's a function of the subjects they happen to have had there.
Okay. Do you have time to run through some listener questions here?
Yeah, we can do a few.
All right. We got a bunch of them, so if we need to move quicker on them, if it's possible, we can hammer through them. If not, we'll just take a few. I'm going to start with the first one I see here, which says, I've been following heavy duty with all the trimmings, forced reps, negatives, and statics. I like the way he worded that. All done to true muscular failure, but muscles like back, legs, and to some extent chest and shoulders are not getting sore at all. I'm wondering if after the years of training that this is that this one set to failure is still not enough. My question is, more advanced you are, would you need some more volume, 2 to 3 sets per body part? I'm not thinking of a lot more volume.
So I was listening to that. I was trying to find the thread too, so that I can find. I have such a hard time finding the questions. Are we in the group for the questions you're reading there, Scott?
They would be on the original post at the Advices Radio Facebook page, not the group.
Clicking on it. The main question to ask, there we go, and there's the comments, is there progress occurring? And I don't know if he's still making progress. I'm looking at, come on, hold still there. all the trimmings, muscle are not getting sore at all. I'm wondering after years of training, so the question is, who knows? The end result is not soreness. The end result is progress.
Okay. Yeah.
So if his loads are going up in the gym and he's eating enough to support growth, then he probably is getting some progress. His weight's going up.
And we've talked about that before. Volume or soreness. Soreness is not the necessarily, and that kind of confuses me because I was raised to believe that if you had a sore muscle, you trained it well. And if you had a sore muscle, you trained it even better. If the muscle's not sore, you didn't work it out hard enough.
John Meadows doesn't get sore very often. He's a pretty big guy. There's huge variability in that.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, last time. So you grow without getting sore, and you can grow while you're getting sore.
Okay.
And I would love to see someone you just gotta throw that in as an extra measurement during the course of a training study. It can be done literally while people are warming up. Just get a muscle soreness rating during their first warm up set.
Okay.
Standardized warm ups, they come into the lab. But who knows if he's not getting sore? If he's not getting sore and he's eating enough to grow, and he's not getting stronger, and the body comp estimates, whatever he's doing in the mirror, don't show muscle growth, then probably he needs to do more.
Okay.
His volume, but if there's so many unknowns there, he's literally looking just at soreness, like you said, and that's overly simplistic.
Okay.
Do that, but more volume. Actually, the research suggests, at least as far as strength goes, that more volume is needed in more advanced individuals. But bodybuilders don't always find that. It kind of depends on how old you are to some degree too, how long you've been training, because age can start to interact with training experience.
Okay.
So that the more trained you get, the harder you can train. The stronger you get, the less you do, which happened to Dorian Yates. Kind of quintessential example of that. And then the older you get, if you're still using the same loads, you may not be able to recover as well, just because age is getting you.
Okay.
So I would probably add more volume, but it's a function of what can you recover from. And just to dig into this, like all the trimmings, so like he's probably doing does a straight set, then he does forced reps and negatives all the way, and then he holds it as long as he can, something like that. So, all the sets, like one set like that might not be enough.
Okay.
But the main thing is if he's getting stronger. So you could ask himself the question, would he get stronger? You may have a sense of this. If he cut those trimmings off, would that mean he could come in and gain some strength?
Okay.
And if he's getting stronger, if he starts now he's been doing 250 on an incline press for eons, and now he can go to 275 and eventually 300 over the next few months by not doing those things, then yes. It may vary depending on the muscle group too.
Okay.
That's what happens.
All right, I'll jump to the next one here. This is from our YouTube page, a guy who's been listening to a bunch of our shows. His name is Vulcan Cezanne, I think you would say his name. He says, I have something in mind. Let's see here. What is the relationship between chronic overtraining, undereating, and low testosterone and low DHEA? And then he asks, are there natural ways to boost these sex hormones again into their normal ranges, if that is possible? What should be adjusted workout and nutrition routine in order to come back from overtraining? So I guess, first of all, Scott, can these hormones be affected by overtraining?
Yes.
Okay.
In your traditional overtraining, model, testosterone levels will go down, cortisol levels go up.
Yeah.
This hasn't been really deeply studied in the context of resistance training, but definitely in endurance training it has.
Okay.
It's a little bit weird with resistance training. But so that's the testosterone to cortisol ratio is the thing that's used. It's even a better indicator. You've got two things that correlate with training status there. So absolutely. Dieting down will reduce testosterone in natural guys. Obviously, if you're using exogenous, it's a different story. But yeah, and then not eating enough is going to limit recovery. And the obvious answer there is if you don't eat enough for a given training stimulus, then you're going to be more likely to overtrain truly than if you're eating more. So the more you eat, the more you can recover, generally speaking.
Isn't there a big part of DC training is like really getting the food in to support that?
Yes, he wants. I think he called it muscle burning furnace or something like that. So,
I like the sound of that.
Food's all of it. Food's the missing ingredient. That if only people I hate when you just sort of overly generalize, but only if the general mindset now were that food is the missing ingredient for growth, as opposed to drugs, we'd have a much more impressive community of bodybuilders, I think, to be honest. Drugs will can make up for will band-aid so many errors in training and food, whereas food is just, it kind of has to be there at some point in time. Yeah. You just need the energy, you need the building materials.
Yeah.
So in order to come out of an overtraining status like that, you're gonna have to deload or just stop. If you're truly overtrained, you probably have to stop training. That's if you're truly overtrained. Very few people truly overtrain, really truly overtrain, where they're starting to lose performance.
Yeah, I think I
decline.
I think I did recently. And then it ended up being, I ended up getting hurt in my shoulder. But I think I was at a point where because I was just pushing to failure, everything, and progressing. And when I pulled back, I think it was too late. I needed to really pull back, stop training, because I think I had done it for too long, and I wasn't getting stronger for a long time. And eventually I was declining. And then everything went downhill. I didn't even want to train. I had anxiety about training. It really stopped becoming fun. It lasted for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was trying to, and really, man, it was just it got out of my control. So I'm going to work on it. I do think it is possible, but yeah, I guess I've heard that said that it's the amount of people that it's probably not, overtraining is something that happens over a long period. It's not something you do in one workout. That's, I think, the thing that I think is the big misconception I've heard people have of overtraining.
I mean, you can, in some of the studies, and I can't remember the exact ways to do it, but the general approach can be to try to, let's just double training volume for 2 weeks. Okay. And people already doing as much volume as they can. And just blast them out of the water. So you can create an overtraining type of scenario defined by a loss in performance.
Yeah.
Very acutely. No one would ever do that or try that unless you just decide all of a sudden you're just going to try to train like Ronnie.
Yeah.
You last 10 days and you're fucked.
Yeah.
But yeah, according to that simple definition of a loss in performance, a declining performance, you were overtrained. So what a lot of people really think of when they say overtraining is literally they're just doing too much to optimize the growth. So it's excessive training. Yeah. It could be growing better if they did less, which I think is maybe true for lots of people.
Yeah.
Training to failure per se is not necessarily the issue. It's the volume that you use when training to failure or not to failure. So again, the inverted U, you get more and more sets eventually creates your optimal adaptation, all other things being equal. And then you start doing too much and eventually you don't have any adaptation. And if you go beyond that, then you have a negative adaptation. You regress. You lose performance. And that's where overtraining would occur.
Okay.
So what else did he say? So ways to get beyond, eat more.
Yeah.
Start eating. So come off your diet. Train less. Do a deload. Pretty simple. Yeah, I think he knows the answer to these questions. He's just wanting us to tell him what he already knows.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I have a feeling if he's watching Muscle Nines, he already knows. Yeah. But it was a good topic. He knew it was a good topic for you, too. I think that's probably part of what it is.
It fits in well with this.
Yeah, so. It does. It does. I've got a couple that don't fit in well. We're going to go into a drug direction here for a minute. I think a drug direction we'll see here. Says, I'll just cut to the point, guys. This is from George. He says, thank you, Dr. Scott. I messaged you on IG about my gyno removal and using AIs still. I kept decreasing my Letro until eventually I started doing 12 to 15 milligrams of Aromacin with 500 to 525 test dosed. I feel great, and blood work has never looked so good, and gyno isn't coming back even though the surgeon said I should stay on AIs. Is this a question, or is he just telling us this stuff? Let's see. He's got another post here. My total test went to 3K. I kind of needed confirmation to try without. Oh, I guess this isn't a question. I think he's just saying thanks.
He's just providing me feedback.
I think so. Yes.
Maybe I didn't. Yeah. Sometimes I have messages that go to that new general folder.
Oh,
on Instagram.
I get lost on those too, man.
They don't show up they don't show up as new messages. You have a whole shitload of them there. So he might have gotten lost in that.
All right. I'm going to bring us back to topic. Okay. How about this? Tony asks, how about mixing it up? Heavy for a few and then volume when you hit a plateau.
For a few
minutes.
Like workouts?
Minutes.
Well,
no, I don't
I don't know. Well, I mean, fortitude training is there's 3 set types, and there's loading sets, the muscle rounds, and the pump sets, and those are heavy, sort of more moderate, and lighter loads.
Okay.
So, for a few, you can do you do it all in one workout too. That's what he means. A few sets, to do a few heavy sets, do pyramids or do some 5 to 10s, 10 to 15s, and 15 to 20. You can absolutely.
I think John Meadows kind of does that. He does. Yeah, he does all sorts of stuff. I've heard him say that why just stimulate one muscle fiber? We hear the fast twitch. You train in the 8 to 10s to do this, and then you train in the. He was like, just train it all. He'll train higher reps to warm the muscle up, and then go to his meat and potatoes movements that are heavier, slightly less reps, and then he'll go even higher reps after that. Flush all the blood in.
I mean, I suggest people, because I know fortitude training, obviously. I know DC training, did that for a long time, and I know the basics of John's programs all differ to some degree. Yeah. But I know the basics of mountain dog training because I co-wrote the book with him, The Brutality of Mountain Dog Training. So that's what I suggest people do. If pick a system that works and keep doing it until you're sick of it.
Yeah. Generally,
squeeze all the progress out of it you can. But those are 3 great programs to rotate through.
Okay.
So mountain dog training tend to be higher reps, higher volume than DC training.
Yeah.
So it'll prepare you pretty well. And this is what you go all the way back to Matt Biev's standard linear progression model, where they would do a hypertrophy. It's called hypertrophy, strength, and power, with the 3 phases.
Yeah.
It's just basic. This is the roots of periodization in the Eastern Bloc. And hypertrophy, so the context for this would a lot of times be athletes who had a previous season where they probably were on lots of gear, and they took time off, didn't do anything, kind of Ronnie Coleman style, took a long break, and they would start them training back the way Arnold would, and probably get them back on the anabolics. In this case, it wasn't explicitly said, but this is probably what's going on to some degree, I think, at least for some athletes. And these are strength and power athletes, so track and field, those sorts of things. And they would literally, they call the first phase hypertrophy, where they do higher volume. They just literally need to get in shape.
Yeah.
So they start training with higher volume, and when they're putting the food back in and they're training again and they're going to regrow muscle, it's going to create hypertrophy.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when they start doing strength, which is going to be higher loads, lower reps. So not doing high rep sets. You're starting to focus in on the strength. And then power would be when they're doing really low reps. So if it's an Olympic weightlifter, for instance, those are very powerful movements where they only do singles and doubles and triples. So that's kind of where that notion kind of comes from.
Okay.
So that's how that's a standard way to do things, and that's kind of what he's talking about. That's a standard model of periodization, and those phases all fit well with one another. First, you get the muscle mass, you get yourself in shape, and then your recovery is really good. In fact, your fitness is really good. So when you go from that, lots of reps, lots of sets, short rest intervals, to trying to strain with heavier loads and strength with just to get stronger per se, the 6 to 10 range, something like that.
Yeah.
Your recovery is really good because now you're doing the sets aren't that. It's not like you're just catching your wind the whole time because you're already in shape and you've regained some muscle mass. So now you can employ that muscle mass with the heavier loads and train your nervous system to lift heavier.
Okay.
And then eventually you go to the power if you're a power-based athlete.
Okay.
But those things all fit well. So alternating between heavier and lighter fits well for I think bodybuilders, and you can put them all in 1 week, like I did in fortitude training, all in one workout, or go between different programs, so different training systems that are more volume based versus DC, which is more load based and progressive overload based, and fortitude training is kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay. So I've got both high rep sets and heavier sets like DC.
Yeah.
So yes.
Here's a good one.
This question.
Would love to hear your insight into top sets / back off sets in terms of tapping into higher threads hold muscle units, larger amounts of muscle fibers. I'm not sure what he means by that last part.
Yeah, I know what he means. So
what does he mean?
So it's Henneman size principle. There's a progressive recruitment of motor units as loads get heavier, or as a set goes from the beginning to its end, where you first activate or bring in the low threshold motor units because they're used when there's a low force or fatigue demand, and then as things get heavier or fatigue gets greater, the higher threshold. That's what he maybe mistyped or got misspelled there somehow.
Or I misread.
Motor units get called upon.
Yeah,
it could be. I don't see it there. I'm not looking on YouTube. So
okay.
So yeah, I'm not sure what he's like. Both of those at the loads that people are using for that, like a 6 to 10 and maybe like a 12 to 15.
Yeah.
If you're taking those sets to failure, you're going to hit the high thresholds in both sets.
Okay.
Without a doubt. Yeah. So a lot of people like to go heavy first and then lighter thereafter. Because if you go if you're going to failure, and like those are all like work sets, bury yourself with both of them, because there seems to be a lesser effect on the heavier set if you do it first versus doing after what we consider the back off set. That's why you call it a back off set. You've gone up to the heaviest load you're going to do, and then you back off the weight, and then you do like the 12 to 15 with a little bit less than what you did for. This is what Dante would do in DC training. The people don't always remember this because DC said, like, if you can't recover from it, don't do it. But usually in DC training for legs, for quads, and I think you just called it quads, you do, like, say you're squatting, you would do like a 6 to 10 and then a 12 or 10 to 12 probably, and then you do a Widowmaker. So it'd be 3 sets. Heavy set, a back off set, and a Widowmaker. Not everyone could recover from that. So somewhere people started just wanting to do 1 set and then a Widowmaker. But the basic DC training is a heavy set and a back off set, which is exactly what he's talking about there.
That's what I've been doing. Yeah. Is the heavier and then the back off. I like that a lot.
Yeah, because if you go like, you might get a little more on the back off if you do it first versus the heavy. But in terms of like the total, if you calculate, this is just. Actually, I did this at one point in time years ago, but if you calculate the for a lot of people, many people, if you calculate the total work performed, weight times reps, just use that as a surrogate, you're going to get more if you do the heavy set and the light set, and the light set thereafter. Okay. Because the fatigue incurred in the lighter set will bring down the load on the heavier set.
Right. That's what I found. Yeah. Just like real world experience.
Yeah, and also like. Driving strength gains, what's probably more important there is the load that you carry, because a lot of that is at those lighter loads is neurological. Sorry, those heavier loads is neurological. Yeah. So if you can like feel 405 as opposed to 365, yeah, when you're doing your heavy set because you're not fatigued previously, then that has more of that's a heavier load. Your nervous system knows this. That's probably better in evoking those neurological adaptations, just in my mind at least, that bring about strength gain. So you're handling the heavier stuff, and also for a lot of people, like powerlifters will do this. I've done this before. Like if you're getting ready for something, having done a heavier load first makes the lighter load feel even lighter. So I've even gone up before the heavy load. Let's say I'm gonna use 405. I might try like 455. Yeah. Just do like a single. I might be able to do 455 for 4 or 5, but I just do a single, just to feel it, So when you go back down to 405, it feels light.
Yeah, I've done that. I feel like there's a lot to be said about, I term it as keying up my central nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. It's just there's probably a short-term memory there. There's probably a nervous system learning effect that will happen. I mean, if you time things right, could even have a post-activation potentiation effect on the skeletal muscle. So a heavier contraction like that. It's called post-activation potentiation.
Okay.
After you've activated a muscle, there can be a potentiation, the force that it produces. That's a long shot, but it's it's something that like strength and power athletes would try to employ. So you do you see sometimes people before they're going to squat, sometimes they just do this instinctively, I think, but they'll kind of do jumps, almost like plyos without boxes.
Yeah.
Jump up and down. Yeah.
I've done that instinctively. Nobody told me to do that.
You're a natural athlete. That's you, baby.
Yeah, I'm the opposite of that.
I know I'm not. I'm just laughing. But that's a high intensity activation, and something in doing so will increase the resultant force in the muscle.
Huh.
And it's the best. So there's actin and myosin, and there's something called myosin light chain that can become phosphorylated, and that will affect the affinity of the myosin for the actin in the cross-bridge cycle.
Okay.
So there may be something going on there that's the best mechanism I've been able to kind of dig up, whereby having done that contraction changes the way the actin and myosin interacts. It'll last, it's only a transient effect, but you do some of those, and then you go and you do the actual lift, and you get more force out of it. So that could be happening too. I wouldn't count on that, but there's definitely something about doing that heavier set just to feel the weight, and then come back down. So this would be this is a good kind of tip. Do it safely, of course, but if you're someone who on those big lifts, that first rep is a maker or breaker for the set. Sometimes you pull for the first rep, and it just comes right up. You're in your groove, it was dead on, and then the set just is it's just gangbusters from then on. You're just going game on, baby. We're gonna just rock this set.
Yeah.
As opposed to you unrack the weight, let's say, and you're like, oh shit,
I don't know about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So having done that heavier load, even just 10% heavier.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a lot. It shouldn't be a 1 rep max. It'd be something that you can do. We're talking about when the heavy set's going to be a 6 to 10, maybe an 8 to 10.
Yeah.
You would go add 5 or 10% that. So it's heavier.
Yeah.
Just to feel the weight.
Yeah.
It's almost like a warm up, but with a heavier weight. So then the actual heavy set is a back off from that load wise.
Yeah.
That helps make that first rep feel really easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gets you past that little that barrier of oh fuck, this is gonna crush me.
Right.
So another way to do that is to do instead if let's say your work weight is going to be 405, and you normally go 135 to 225, 315, 365, 405. You might do 365 and then do a 385. Just in between there, just so you get incrementally, so you don't even feel that there's no difference, really. So that gets you closer. But going above that and then coming back down, as long as that rep doesn't throw you completely off, like you chose the wrong weight and you're like, oh fuck, that makes a big difference. And you feel that too when you do the back off set, right? You do your heavier set and you go to that back off set.
I was just thinking that, for the first 4 reps, I'm like, oh, this is easy. And then after that first 4 reps, then I die, then it gets real hard.
Well, then it's supposed to get tough.
Yeah.
But you don't have that, oh God, in fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It feels relatively lighter than if you probably had done that first.
Yeah. I think we've all had that experience where we've gone to lift that first heavy set and it just buries us. It feels like, oh shit, this is a lot heavier than I expected kind of feeling.
Yeah.
I know that if I feel that way, I wasn't ready. And we've talked before about warming up. I take a really long time to warm up, but that's because when I warm up, I want to be 100%. And some of that might've been, I don't really go up above the weight I want to use, but I've been known if it's say a dumbbell row to use the actual dumbbell I'm going to row with and just do one, and feel it then I'll take a minute, I'll be like, okay, yeah, I'm ready for that, but I'm going to take 1 minute now, and then I'll do the set.
And it's interesting too, like you can almost trick yourself in the same way by doing that, because if your warm-ups are getting incrementally heavier, this is weird the way this works, but I've noticed this for years now, and then you do like that single with the actual work weight, it's almost as if your brain is anticipating that the next weight's going to be heavier than it is, but it's not. It's the same one you just did.
Yeah. Huh, I never thought of that.
It does. It feels like when you actually do that first rep on the real set, it feels lighter than that single did.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's because you did the single. If you hadn't done the single, it would have felt the way it did when you actually did the work set.
Yeah.
Or when you actually did the single at the beginning of your work set. So there's something there about that, like just like you're sort of tricking the nervous system. Maybe it's post-activation potentiation, or who knows. But there's something to say for that, for training heavy and pushing hard.
Yeah.
You won't see, like, to harken back and maybe tie up some of the things we're talking about, you're not going to have to deploy that when you're a beginner in your first 4 or 5 months of training, probably.
No, nor would you know how.
Right. Yeah. Wouldn't occur to you.
Yeah.
You're not pushing that hard. Like, you're not getting bone crushing weights, at least for you.
Right.
Relatively speaking. Yeah.
All right.
So.
This is good. You cleared up some things for me, Scott.
Good. I'm glad. Now, this was last time I got a little too far out there, so this time I'm glad I got
I rewatched it though, the last episode, and it made a lot more sense to me, sitting back and not being like the guy who was like running the boards and all that. And I got to just be I got to be a participant, you know what I mean, and watch, it did. And we got some good feedback on that too, guys. Of course, anybody who's watching this, the recorded version on YouTube, we appreciate you. Anybody who does enjoy this, do us a favor, hit the like button. I should mention that at the beginning of the show. You know that, Scott? I should say, hey, smash that like button. Subscribe.
That's the thing. Everyone does that, They beg for that shit.
And you should. You got to remind people, because if you don't, then they're like, I don't even think about it. But it does help us out.
The next one.
What's that?
You want to catch the next one.
Yeah. Well, and also, too, it helps us out because it helps to boost us in the algorithm, helps more people to find our stuff, which, we want to try to get this content out there and get it seen by as many people.
Plus, you got to come up with some way to pay me my exorbitant salary for this podcast. Too.
Exactly. And I want more of the Weeder disciples to click on our videos and see and learn.
Absolutely.
Learn the truth.
I want to know literally what things I may have misremembered and don't know about, like what really went down, because I just didn't pay so much attention. I'll tell you one thing with Mentor is that I remember reading like long ago, maybe in one of the muscle magazines, that Mike Mentor derived his logic for training. This is when I was first sort of looking into, becoming exercise science trained. He derived it all from just logical principles of philosophy.
Okay.
And he didn't really, that's kind of how, like, some of the things I read early on, and maybe someone who is more connected with that can answer that, but it was as if he didn't take in the trenches experience and results. Rather, he just created a theoretical model based on what he expected would logically happen in a very sort of disconnected way. That didn't really reflect things that I knew he was seeing in the gym. We would have been seeing, but it's like he just went so far into sort of the lofty clouds of Ayn Rand and her philosophy and various other things that he never sort of connected with what, how this plays out in the real world in a way. And that sort of I was like, well, I mean, I get you where you're coming from, but like, where's the rubber meet the road here when it comes to this stuff? Yeah. So there's a lot to what he does, without a doubt. That was one of the things that I just remember thinking, I'm not gonna ascribe to this too much. I like some of the ideas, and some of it definitely plays out in my mind. But like you gotta connect all the dots for it to sell me on it, I guess, which I didn't see him doing, but he may have otherwise. So that's why I like to hear from other people.
I see too. The way I see his training is like, if we look back at the early automobiles, they're nothing compared to a 2020 car. And I see it as kind of like, because it was what it was part of history. And the suspension on a Model T was not that good. There was a lot of things about the Model T that were not. You could take a nice car from the 60s, even like a really nice hot rod. There's going to be some things that are not comfortable about that car. It's not going to hold the road with like the computerized stuff they have, the brakes, everything. It's not going to be nearly as good as the cars of today, but it served a purpose at the time, and it led us to where we are.
Yeah, but there's truth to that. And then of course, Dorian Yates was training at the end of the 90s.
Okay.
Got a pretty solid training program. I don't know how much, that worked great for him. I've got a 1999 Ford F-350 with the 7.3 Power Stroke.
Yeah.
And that's still considered one of the best diesel engines of all time.
Yeah.
To this day, the most reliable. I don't know. We'll have to see how the newer ones sort of pan out reliability-wise, but people don't scoff at that engine. People recognize it when I pull up a gas station. It's like, oh, that's 7.3. They know from the body style of the truck too, but
yeah, I
get comments on that all the time. I might as well be driving like a Lamborghini or something for some people. I got the legendary engine.
Do you really?
It's a big deal. Oh,
that's cool.
It's so, and it's funny because part of it, people have to do various modifications to the newer engines because the engines had to be changed because of emission standards.
Oh yeah, right.
That was part of it, why it is able to do what it does. But so that was 20 years ago. Yeah. So there's Metzger's got a lot of good stuff. The thing is, it's hard to put him in a box because he changed, I think, over the years, and that's what's still confusing to me is when did he, how wide was he spread in terms of what he suggested from start to finish?
And I want to find out too how much of it was his ideas and how much of it was Arthur Jones. Because I know that he was a big influence on Mentzer,
And there's also heavy duty is I think what Mike called it, but HIT is what people say generally as a generic category. And heavy duty was this one iteration of his specific philosophy at one point in time.
Yeah. I found a Mike Mentzer t-shirt. I asked for it for my birthday, so maybe I'll be wearing that on our next episode. We'll see.
Can you grow out a Mike Mentzer mustache for the maybe?
I'm not allowed to. I've been told. I've been told no on that. I did do a filter with the a phone on my phone, a filter with the mustache. Right. It was a good look, but some people don't appreciate it. So
no porn stash for you, huh?
No, unfortunately.
Bummer.
All right, guys.
That would be the really way to put that shirt on and get the stash going. Then I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
That guy's going all in, man.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a 2X, which is about my size. If I can get to the point where it doesn't fit anymore, then I will be impressed. And that will be the truth, whether, high intensity works or not. How about that? That will prove it.
And then you grow the mustache out just to commemorate that extraordinary life success that you've outgrown the 2X. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
Thank you, Scott.
You said it right here. Don't clip it out. It's in the podcast. Can't move that. I promise.
Well, I appreciate you, Scott. I've learned so much from you over the last few years, more than I initially realized I would have. But your ideas they've really influenced me a lot in my own training. So it's been important to me, and I'm glad that we can do this show. I think the show has become, honestly, it's become more important over the years. I really think it has. And I think that what we're doing is good stuff. I hope that, I joke a little bit about the Mentzer stuff and everything, but I am interested in him. But I do think that what we're spreading here is good information that gets people thinking at least. They don't have to change what they're doing, but at least as long as they think about it,
I think there are people who want to be sort of inspired and brought into a more of a thinking man's bodybuilder perspective on things. Some people don't want to think; they just want to tell me what to do. I don't care why. I don't want to know. But the people who are inclined to think about things more and try to create their own training strategies, I think they dig this. So I'm happy to provide nourishment for those minds.
All right, guys. For another episode of Muscle Minds with Dr. Scott Stevenson, I'm Scott McNally. Check out fortitudetraining.net. Go to byobbcoach.com. Check out truenutrition.com. You can pick up some J-Flex. Keep your joints healthy and you can keep doing high intensity training. Guys, we'll see you soon.
There you go. Adios.